The biting wind of the Wyoming Territory whipped across the barren plains as Zachariah Abbott squinted against the setting sun, his weathered face a map of the hard miles he'd traveled. The winter of 1875 had come early and harsh, painting the landscape with frost and sending most sensible folk indoors. But Zach, as most called him, was still a day's ride from his cabin outside Loveland, and the temperature was dropping fast. He pulled his coat tighter, adjusting the worn leather hat that had seen him through 8 years of cattle drives, bar fights, and lonesome trails. At 32, he was neither young nor old by frontier standards, just experienced enough to know when trouble was brewing, either in the sky or in a man's eyes. The first stars were appearing when he heard it, a weak cough carried on the wind. Zach reined in his horse, a sturdy buckskin named Chance, and listened. There it was again, followed by what sounded like a stifled sob. "Hello," he called out, his hand instinctively moving to the Colt revolver on his hip. In these parts, caution wasn't just wise, it was necessary. When no response came, he guided Chance toward a small grove of cottonwoods. As he drew closer, he could make out a huddled figure beneath one of the trees. A woman, her arms wrapped around herself, shivering violently in the cold. "Madam," Zach dismounted, approaching slowly. "Are you all right?" She looked up, her face pale and drawn, eyes wide with fear and exhaustion. She couldn't have been more than 25, with dark hair escaping from beneath a tattered bonnet. What caught his attention immediately was the unmistakable swell of her belly beneath her thin coat. She began before another fit of coughing overtook her. "I'm fine," she finally managed, though her blue-tinged lips and trembling hands told a different story. Zach knelt beside her, noting the small carpetbag at her side, her only possession, it seemed. "You're pregnant and sick in the middle of nowhere as night's falling. That's about as far from fine as a person can get." His tone was gruff but not unkind. "I was on the stagecoach," she explained weakly. "It left without me when I needed a moment of privacy." Her cheeks colored slightly despite her pallor. "I thought I could walk to the next station, but..." Another cough racked her body and Zach made a decision. He stood and extended his hand. "You'll warm by my fire tonight," he said firmly. "My cabin's still a day's ride, but I can make camp and get you out of this wind. Come morning, we'll figure something out." She hesitated, eyeing his outstretched hand with uncertainty. "Madam, I don't know your story and you don't have to tell it. But that baby you're carrying won't last the night out here, and neither will you." After a moment, she placed her gloved hand in his. "Beatrice," she said quietly. "Beatrice Ellison." "Zachariah Abbott," he replied, helping her to her feet. "Most folks call me Zach." As he assisted her onto his horse, she swayed slightly, and he steadied her with a firm hand. "Easy now. Chance here is gentle, but you're looking ready to topple." "Thank you," Beatrice whispered. "I don't know what would have happened if..." She broke off, coughing again. "No need to think on that," Zach said, gathering her meager belongings. "What's done is done. What matters is getting you warm." He led the horse a half-mile farther, finding a sheltered hollow where the wind couldn't reach. With practiced efficiency, he set up camp, building a fire that soon crackled with welcome heat. He helped Beatrice settle on his bedroll, draping his spare blanket around her shoulders. "How far along are you?" he asked as he prepared coffee in an old tin pot. 7 months, I think," she replied, extending her hands toward the flames. "It's hard to be certain." Zach nodded, not pressing for details. Instead, he rummaged in his saddlebags and produced some jerky and hardtack. "Not much of a meal, but it's something." "Tomorrow I'll try to hunt us up some fresh meat." Beatrice accepted the food gratefully. As the fire's warmth began to penetrate her chilled body, more color returned to her cheeks. "You're very kind, Mr. Abbott." "Just Zach," he corrected, "and I'm just doing what anyone would." She gave a bitter smile. Not everyone. The statement hung between them, loaded with unspoken history. Zach sipped his coffee, studying her over the rim of his cup. She was pretty, even in her disheveled state, not in the flashy way of the saloon girls in town, but with a quiet dignity that hardship hadn't quite extinguished. "Where were you headed?" he asked finally. "Nowhere in particular," Beatrice admitted. "Just away." She unconsciously placed a protective hand over her belly. "Somewhere new, somewhere safe." Zach nodded, understanding without needing the details. The West was full of people running from something or someone. He'd done his share of running too before settling near Loveland 3 years ago. "Well, Miss Ellison, Mrs.," she corrected automatically, then looked down. "Though I suppose that doesn't matter much anymore. Mrs. Ellison," he amended, "once you're rested, I can take you to Loveland. It's a small town, but decent enough. Might be a place for a fresh start." Beatrice looked up, hope and wariness battling in her expression. "Why would you help me? You don't know me." Zach poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks dancing into the night sky. "My ma used to say that the measure of a man isn't what he does when folks are watching, but what he does when no one's there to see." He shrugged. "Besides, winter's coming hard. No time for anyone to be alone out here." She studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Thank you." As the night deepened around them, Beatrice's coughing gradually subsided. Zach insisted she take the bedroll while he sat with his back against a boulder, his rifle across his knees. He watched as she fell into an exhausted sleep, her face softened by the firelight. What kind of man leaves his pregnant wife to fend for herself? He muttered to himself before turning his gaze to the vast starry sky above. Morning dawned clear and cold, the frost making the prairie grass glitter like scattered diamonds. Zach had been up before first light, adding wood to the fire and brewing fresh coffee. He'd managed to shoot a rabbit, which was now roasting on a spit over the flames. Beatrice stirred, sitting up slowly. Her cough seemed improved, though she still looked pale. "Morning," Zach greeted, handing her a cup of coffee. "Thought you might be hungry." "I'm starving, actually," she admitted, accepting the cup with both hands. "I haven't eaten properly in a while." Zach cut her a generous portion of rabbit, watching as she tried to maintain ladylike manners despite her obvious hunger. "Eat," he encouraged. "The baby needs it." She needed no further urging, finishing her portion quickly before looking embarrassed at her eagerness. Zach simply cut her another piece without comment. "You said Loveland is a day's ride," she asked after satisfying the worst of her hunger. "Thereabouts. We'll have to go slow with you being in your condition and all," Zach replied, cleaning his knife on his trouser leg. "Should make it by nightfall if we get moving soon." "What sort of town is it?" Beatrice asked, a hint of anxiety in her voice. Zach considered his answer carefully. "Small but growing. Got a general store, a church, couple of saloons, sheriff's a fair man. People mostly mind their business." He paused. "It's not much compared to the big cities back east, but folks look out for each other when it counts. And would there be work for someone like me?" The question was hesitant. "Depends on what you can do." "I was a teacher before." She trailed off, her hand again moving protectively to her stomach. Zach's eyebrows rose. "Educated, then? That's something Loveland could use. Town's got enough children now to need a proper school, but the last teacher left when she got married last spring." A small smile touched Beatrice's lips. "Really, they might need someone, can't promise anything," Zach cautioned, "but I know Mayor Wilson's been concerned about it." He started packing up their camp. "First thing, though, is to get you there in one piece." The journey to Loveland was slow and careful. Zach walked, leading Chance with Beatrice in the saddle. They stopped often to rest, and he kept a watchful eye on her condition, noting when her coughing worsened with exertion. During one such rest, as they shared jerky and the last of the hardtack, Beatrice finally spoke of her past. "My husband was a banker in St. Louis," she said, her voice flat. "Robert Ellison, from a good family. The match was arranged by my father, a business arrangement more than a marriage." Zach listened silently, offering her his canteen. "He wasn't." She took a breath. "He wasn't a kind man. When I told him about the baby, he accused me of unfaithfulness." Her voice wavered. "He said no child of his would take 9 months to arrive." Zach's jaw tightened, but he kept his expression neutral. "I tried to explain that some babies simply come early, but he wouldn't listen. He beat me that night, worse than usual. Said he'd see me in an asylum before he'd claim another man's child." Her eyes were dry now, as if she'd exhausted all her tears long ago. "I took what money I could find and left the next day. I've been traveling west for 2 months. And the stage left you behind yesterday," Zach concluded. She nodded. "The driver didn't like having a pregnant woman aboard to begin with. Said I made the other passengers uncomfortable." When I needed to step away, he saw his chance. A bitter smile twisted her lips. Apparently, my fare only guaranteed passage until I became inconvenient. Zach felt a surge of anger on her behalf. That ain't right. Few things are, Mr. Abbott, she replied quietly. But I'm alive, and so is my baby. That's more than I had reason to hope for yesterday. They continued their journey, the vast Wyoming landscape stretching around them. By late afternoon, Zach pointed to a smudge on the horizon. Loveland, he said, we'll be there by sunset. As they drew closer, the town gradually took shape, a main street with wooden buildings on either side, a small church with a modest steeple, scattered houses, and a few larger ranch houses on the outskirts. Smoke rose from chimneys against the darkening sky, and lamps were being lit in windows. Beatrice straightened in the saddle, trying to make herself presentable despite days of travel. Zach noticed her nervousness. Town's small enough that strangers get noticed, he warned. But most folks are decent. Just follow my lead and we'll get you situated. Their arrival did indeed draw attention. As they made their way down the main street, curtains twitched and a few people paused in their evening tasks to stare. Zach nodded politely to those he knew but didn't stop to chat. First things first, he said to Beatrice. You need a proper place to rest. The boarding house is clean and the owner, Mrs. Parker, is discreet. The boarding house was a 2-story wooden structure with a small porch and window boxes that would hold flowers in warmer months. Zach helped Beatrice down from the horse, steadying her when she swayed slightly from exhaustion. Mrs. Parker, a plump widow in her 50s, answered the door with an expression of surprise that quickly shifted to concern when she saw Beatrice's condition. Zachariah Abbott, what have you brought to my doorstep? She asked, though her tone was more curious than accusatory. Mrs. Parker, this is Mrs. Ellison. She was abandoned by the stagecoach and needs lodging, Zach explained simply. I found her out on the prairie yesterday, Mrs. Parker's eyes widened, taking in Beatrice's pregnant state and obvious fatigue. Left alone, in her condition, Lord have mercy. She opened the door wider. Come in, child, you look half frozen. I can pay, Beatrice said quickly, reaching for her carpetbag. I have some money. We'll discuss that after you've had a hot meal and a proper rest, Mrs. Parker insisted, guiding her inside. She turned back to Zach. You did right bringing her here, Zach. I'll take good care of her. Zach nodded, suddenly uncertain. His duty was done. He'd found Beatrice, kept her from freezing to death, and brought her to safety. There was no reason to feel this strange reluctance to leave her. I'll come by tomorrow, he found himself saying. See how she's settling in. Mrs. Parker gave him a knowing look, but simply nodded. Good night, Zach. As the door closed, Zach stood for a moment on the porch, staring at the wooden panels as if they might offer some explanation for the unsettled feeling in his chest. Finally, he turned and led Chance toward the livery stable, his thoughts full of a dark-haired woman with determined eyes and a child who needed a safe place to be born. Over the next week, Zach found himself making daily visits to the boarding house. Beatrice's health improved rapidly with proper food and rest, her cough diminishing to an occasional reminder of her ordeal. Under Mrs. Parker's motherly care, she began to look less like a fugitive and more like the genteel teacher she claimed to be. During his visits, he learned more about her. She was 24, the daughter of a successful merchant who had traded her future for a business alliance. She loved literature and had a soft spot for Shakespeare. She played the piano, though not exceptionally well by her own admission. She had a quiet humor that emerged as she grew more comfortable in his presence. For his part, Zach shared pieces of his own story, how he'd come west at 18, worked cattle drives for years, before saving enough to buy his small spread outside town. How he'd built his cabin with his own hands, how he raised horses now instead of driving cattle. He was careful with his words, unaccustomed to speaking so much, but Beatrice was an attentive listener who seemed genuinely interested in his simple life. On his 7th visit, he arrived to find Beatrice sitting in the parlor with Mayor Wilson, a portly man with ambitious plans for the growing town. They were deep in conversation but looked up when Mrs. Parker showed Zach in. Abbott, good timing, the mayor said jovially. I was just telling Mrs. Ellison that we'd be delighted to have someone of her qualifications teaching our young ones. Beatrice's face was alight with cautious hope. The mayor has offered me the position, Zach, starting after the new year, assuming. She glanced down at her belly. Assuming the little one arrives safely and mother recovers, Mayor Wilson finished diplomatically. The town council agrees we can't let someone with a proper Boston education slip through our fingers. That's fine news, Zach said, genuinely pleased for her. Congratulations. It comes with lodging, too, Beatrice added. There's a small house behind the schoolhouse. It's not much, but it's yours, Zach finished, understanding what this meant to her: independence, security. After the mayor left, Beatrice turned to Zach, her expression a mix of joy and uncertainty. It's happening so fast. Just over a week ago, I thought. She swallowed hard. I never imagined I could have a real fresh start. You deserve it, Zach said simply, Mrs. Parker, who had been pretending not to listen from across the room, suddenly announced that she needed to check on dinner, leaving them alone. In the silence that followed, Beatrice studied Zach's face. I haven't properly thanked you. Not really. No need, he replied, uncomfortable with her gratitude. Anyone would have. No, she interrupted firmly. Not anyone would have. You saved my life, Zachariah Abbott, and my baby's life. Her hand rested on her stomach, which seemed to have grown even in the short time she'd been in Loveland. I won't forget that. Zach shifted in his chair, unused to such earnestness. Well then, you're welcome. After a moment, he added, I should be heading back to my place. Haven't checked on the horses proper in a week. Beatrice looked disappointed but nodded. Of course, will you? Will you visit again? The question was tentative, as if she feared overstepping. Zach found himself nodding before he'd even considered his answer. I reckon I will. The weeks passed, and Beatrice became a familiar presence in Loveland. The story of her rescue, a simplified version that omitted the details of her marriage, had spread through town, casting her as a widowed teacher caught in misfortune rather than a woman fleeing abuse. People were kind, if curious, and she gradually built a small circle of acquaintances. Zach continued his visits, sometimes bringing small gifts, a jar of honey from a fellow rancher, a book he'd found in the general store, a wooden rocking chair he'd repaired for the baby. He told himself it was neighborly concern, nothing more. But each time he saw her smile of greeting, something stirred in him that he wasn't ready to name. December arrived with heavy snows that blanketed the territory. Zach made fewer trips to town, the journey becoming treacherous with drifts that could trap a horse and rider. When he did visit, he stayed longer, reluctant to begin the cold ride home in the early darkness. On one such visit, 2 weeks before Christmas, he arrived to find Beatrice alone in the parlor, her face drawn with pain. What's wrong? He asked immediately, crossing to her side. Just false pains, she assured him, though her knuckles were white where she gripped the arm of her chair. Mrs. Parker says it's common at this stage. The baby's not due for another month. Zach frowned. Should I fetch the doctor? No need, they come and go. She forced a smile. Tell me about your week instead. How are the horses handling the snow? He reluctantly began to speak of his work, keeping a watchful eye on her. Twice during his story, she paused to breathe deeply through what was clearly pain, but each time insisted she was fine. As evening approached, Mrs. Parker entered with a worried expression. Another storm's coming in, Zach. Sheriff says it looks to be a bad one. She glanced at Beatrice. Might be best if you stayed in town tonight. Zach hesitated, looking out the window at the darkening sky. The wind was already picking up, driving the snow into swirling patterns. I can put you up in the spare room, Mrs. Parker offered. No sense risking the ride back in this. Before Zach could answer, Beatrice suddenly gasped, doubling over in her chair. A puddle formed at her feet as her water broke. The baby, she whispered, her face white with fear. It's coming, too early. Mrs. Parker moved with surprising speed for a woman her size. I'll fetch Dr. Wallace. Zach, help her to her room's second door on the right upstairs. As Mrs. Parker hurried out into the gathering storm, Zach carefully helped Beatrice to her feet. She clung to him as another contraction hit, her fingers digging into his arm. I'm scared, she admitted, her voice small. I know, he said softly, but you're strong, Beatrice, stronger than anyone I know. And you're not alone. She looked up at him, her eyes wet with tears and bright with something else, trust, perhaps, or something deeper. "Promise you won't leave?" "I promise," he said, the words feeling like a vow more binding than any he'd made before. "I'll be right here as long as you need me." The labor was long and difficult. Dr. Wallace arrived, grim-faced but competent, and quickly took charge. Outside, the promised storm howled around the boarding house, rattling windows and driving snow against the glass. Inside, in a small bedroom lit by lamps and a roaring fire, Beatrice fought to bring her child into the world. Zach paced the hallway, flinching at each cry of pain. Mrs. Parker bustled between the kitchen and bedroom, carrying hot water, clean linens, and whispered updates. "The baby's positioned wrong," she told him after one such trip, her face grave. "Doctors trying to turn it." Zach felt helpless in a way he never had before, not during the war, not during the worst cattle stampede he'd ever witnessed. This was a different kind of battle, one where his strength and skills meant nothing. Near midnight, when Beatrice's cries had grown weaker and more desperate, Dr. Wallace emerged, wiping blood from his hands. "She's asking for you," he said to Zach. "It's not going well. The baby's stuck and she's exhausted." Zach's mouth went dry. "Will she?" The doctor's expression was grim. "I've seen stronger women lost to easier births, but she has fight in her." He hesitated. Sometimes, in cases like this, having someone they care for nearby can make the difference. Zach entered the room cautiously. Beatrice lay propped against pillows, her hair plastered to her face with sweat, her skin ashen. When she saw him, she extended a trembling hand. "Zach," she whispered, "I don't think I can do this." He crossed to her, taking her hand in his. "Yes, you can," he said firmly. "You've come too far to give up now. That baby needs you, and—" He swallowed hard. "And I need you too." Her eyes widened slightly. "You do? More than I realized until right now," he admitted, the words coming from somewhere deep and previously untapped. "So you fight, Beatrice Ellison. You fight for your baby and for the life you're building here, and maybe, if you want, for a life that includes me too." A new determination flickered in her eyes. She nodded, squeezing his hand with surprising strength. "Stay with me." "Wild horses couldn't drag me away," he promised. For the next hour, Zach stayed by her side, holding her hand through contractions that came like waves, offering water and encouragement. When Dr. Wallace returned to make another attempt to turn the baby, Zach moved to leave, but Beatrice wouldn't release his hand. "Please," she gasped, "I need you here." And so he stayed, his face turned toward hers, speaking softly of spring on the prairie, of wildflowers and clear streams, of anything to distract her from the doctor's manipulations. When she cried out in agony, he found himself praying for the first time in years simple, desperate pleas for her safety and the child's. Finally, near dawn, with the storm still raging outside, a new cry joined the wind, the lusty wail of a newborn. Beatrice collapsed against the pillows, tears streaming down her face as Dr. Wallace announced, "It's a boy, small but strong." Mrs. Parker cleaned the tiny infant and placed him in Beatrice's arms. Despite the difficult birth, the boy was indeed strong, with a shock of dark hair and a determined cry that seemed to announce his presence to the world. "Hello, little one," Beatrice whispered, her exhaustion momentarily forgotten as she gazed at her son. "You certainly know how to make an entrance." Zach found himself overwhelmed by the scene, this brave woman, and the child she'd fought so hard to protect. Without thinking, he reached out to touch the baby's tiny hand. 5 perfect fingers wrapped instinctively around his calloused index finger, and something in Zach's heart shifted permanently. "He's perfect," he said, his voice rough with emotion. Beatrice looked up at him, a tired smile on her pale face. "Would you like to hold him?" Carefully, as if handling the most precious cargo in the world, Zach took the swaddled infant into his arms. The boy quieted, gazing up with unfocused newborn eyes. "What will you call him?" Zach asked. Beatrice considered for a moment. "William," she decided. "It means determined protector." "It seems fitting." "William," Zach repeated, testing the name. "It suits him." Dr. Wallace, who had been cleaning his instruments, approached the bed. "You need rest, Mrs. Ellison. The birth was difficult and you've lost blood, but with proper care you should recover well." He glanced at the baby. The boy is early but appears healthy. Keep him warm and fed. After the doctor left, with Mrs. Parker seeing him out, Zach reluctantly returned William to his mother's arms. I should let you rest, he said, though leaving was the last thing he wanted to do. Zach, Beatrice called softly as he reached the door. Did you mean what you said, about wanting a life that includes me? He turned back, meeting her tired but hopeful gaze. Every word, he replied simply, but that's a conversation for when you're stronger. For now, just know that I'll be here for both of you if you want me to be. Her smile was like sunrise after the longest night. I'd like that very much. The storm continued for 3 days, effectively trapping Zach at the boarding house. He slept in the spare room, helped Mrs. Parker with chores, and spent hours sitting beside Beatrice's bed, sometimes talking, sometimes in comfortable silence. He held William often, marveling at how someone so small could feel so significant. When Beatrice slept, he found himself watching her, the gentle rise and fall of her breathing, the way her hair spread across the pillow. She was beautiful, not just in features but in spirit, her courage, her determination, her capacity for joy despite all she'd endured. On the 4th day, the storm finally broke, leaving Loveland buried in snow but bathed in bright winter sunshine. Zach stood at Beatrice's window, looking out at the transformed landscape. I should check on my place, he said reluctantly. Make sure the horses are all right. Beatrice, sitting up in bed with William nursing at her breast, nodded. Of course, you've been away far too long already. He turned to her, suddenly awkward. I'll come back, though, tomorrow if the trails are passable. We'll be here, she assured him, adjusting the blanket around William. Mrs. Parker says I can move into the teacher's house next week if I continue to recover well. Zach nodded, thinking of the small house behind the schoolhouse. It would be a good place for her and William, but it felt far away from his cabin outside town. That's good. You'll be settled before school starts. An uncomfortable silence fell between them, laden with things unsaid. Finally, Zach cleared his throat. Beatrice, you don't have to say anything, Zach, she interrupted gently. What happens in the midst of a crisis isn't always what people truly feel. I understand no, he said firmly. That's not it. I meant every word, He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated by his inability to express himself. I'm not good with words, never have been, but I know what I feel. He crossed to the bed and knelt beside it, bringing himself to eye level with her. When I found you out there, I was just doing what needed doing. I didn't expect. He gestured helplessly between them. Whatever this is, I didn't expect to care so much. Beatrice's eyes softened. I didn't expect it either, but here we are. Here we are, he echoed. The thing is, Beatrice, I'm just a simple rancher. I don't have much to offer a woman like you, educated, refined. A woman like me, she laughed softly. Zach, I'm a pregnant widow who was abandoned in the wilderness. Hardly a grand catch. You're the strongest, kindest woman I've ever known, he corrected. And any man would be lucky to, he stopped, gathering his courage. What I'm trying to say, poorly, is that I think I'm falling in love with you, and with William too, though I've only known him 3 days. Beatrice's breath caught. Oh, too soon, he asked, suddenly uncertain. She reached out to touch his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. No, not too soon, just unexpected, wonderful but unexpected. I'm not asking for anything, Zach hurried to add. You've been through so much, and you've only just had William. I just wanted you to know where I stand before I leave. I'll respect whatever you decide. Beatrice's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. Zachariah Abbott, you saved my life and my son's life. You stayed by my side through the most terrifying night of my existence. You've shown me nothing but kindness and respect. She took a deep breath. And I think I might be falling in love with you too. The simple statement hit Zach like a physical force. For a moment, he could only stare at her, certain he'd misheard. You don't have to say that, he finally managed. Not out of gratitude, or I'm not, she said firmly. I'm saying it because it's true. Because something happened between us that night in the storm, something real and important. Because when I look at you holding William, I see the man I want in our lives not just as a savior or a friend, but as what? He prompted when she hesitated. As family, she finished softly, if that's what you want too. Zach didn't trust himself to speak. Instead, he leaned forward and gently, carefully pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was brief but perfect to promise a beginning. When he drew back, Beatrice was smiling through her tears. "I'll take that as a yes, definitely a yes," he confirmed, his own voice unsteady, "but we'll take it slow. Get to know each other properly. Do things right." William chose that moment to finish nursing and let out a contented sigh, drawing their attention. Beatrice adjusted her clothing and shifted the baby to her shoulder, patting his back with practiced ease despite having been a mother for only days. "He likes you," she said to Zach. "He always settles when you hold him." "Smart boy," Zach replied with a grin. He stood reluctantly. "I really should check on my place, but I'll be back tomorrow." "We'll be waiting," Beatrice promised. As Zach rode home through the snow-covered landscape, he found himself smiling despite the biting cold. His life had changed irrevocably in the space of a week, altered by a chance encounter and a woman's courage. For the first time in years, he was looking forward to more than just the next season, the next harvest, the next horse to break. He was looking forward to a future one that included a dark-haired teacher and her infant son. His cabin, when he reached it, was cold and lonely after the warmth of the boarding house. The horses were fine, huddled together in the barn for warmth, and nothing seemed amiss beyond some snow drifts against the north wall. He built a fire, tended to chores, and tried to settle back into his solitary routine. But his thoughts kept returning to Loveland, to the small room where Beatrice was recovering, to tiny William with his perfect fingers and determined cry. The next morning, Zach made a decision. After feeding the horses and securing the cabin, he rode back to town with a purpose. His first stop was the general store, where he purchased supplies: coffee, sugar, flour, and other staples. His second stop was more significant. Mayor Wilson was surprised to see him in the town hall. "Abbott. Heard you were stranded at Mrs. Parker's during the birth. Quite a story finding the lady and then being there when her baby came early." "Yes, sir," Zach replied, removing his hat. "That's partly why I'm here. I understand Mrs. Ellison will be moving into the teacher's house next week." "That's right. Small place but clean and sturdy. Should serve her and the little one well until she decides on something more permanent." Zach nodded, turning his hat in his hands. "The thing is, Mayor, I was wondering about the regulations regarding the teacher's residence." Wilson's bushy eyebrows rose. "Regulations?" "Yes, sir. Specifically whether the teacher is required to live there alone or if a husband would be permitted as well." Understanding dawned on the mayor's face. "I see. Planning to court our new teacher, are you?" "With her permission, yes, sir," Zach replied steadily. "But I wanted to be sure there wouldn't be any complications with her position." Wilson chuckled. "No regulations against married teachers in Loveland, Abbott. In fact, given the circumstances, I'd say the town would be downright pleased to see Mrs. Ellison settled with a good man." He studied Zach thoughtfully. "You're sure about this? Taking on another man's widow and child is no small matter." "I've never been more sure of anything," Zach said simply. The mayor nodded, apparently satisfied. "Then you have my blessing for what it's worth. The teacher's house would be tight for 3, but it would do to start." "Thank you, sir," Zach replied, settling his hat back on his head. "I appreciate your understanding." His final stop before returning to the boarding house was the small church on the edge of town. The minister, Reverend Hayes, was sweeping snow from the steps when Zach approached. "Zachariah Abbott," the Reverend greeted him warmly. "Haven't seen you at Sunday service in quite some time." "No, sir," Zach admitted. "I've been remiss." "What brings you here today, if not a sudden religious awakening?" the older man asked with a twinkle in his eye. Zach shifted uncomfortably. "I wanted to ask about marriage, the procedure, I mean." Reverend Hayes leaned on his broom, regarding Zach with interest. "I presume this relates to Mrs. Ellison. News traveled fast in Loveland." "Yes, sir, though nothing's settled yet," Zach hastened to add. "I'm just considering possibilities." "I see," the Reverend nodded thoughtfully. "Well, the procedure is simple enough. Banns would be read on 3 consecutive Sundays announcing your intention to marry, then the ceremony itself with witnesses present." He paused. "However, given Mrs. Ellison's recent bereavement and childbirth, a longer engagement might be appropriate." "Of course," Zach agreed quickly. "I wouldn't want to rush her or create gossip," he added, thinking of how such haste might affect Beatrice's standing in the community. A wise consideration, Reverend Hayes said approvingly. May I offer some advice from one who has performed many marriages? Please, take the time to know each other fully before you commit. Marriage is a sacred bond, and while I believe God brings people together in mysterious ways, even through chance encounters in snowstorms, it's important that you build a foundation of true understanding. Zach nodded, taking the words to heart. Thank you, Reverend. That's good counsel. When he finally arrived at the boarding house, he found Beatrice sitting in the parlor, William sleeping peacefully in a basket beside her. She looked up from her book with a smile that warmed him more effectively than any fire could have. You came back, she said, as if still surprised by the fact. I said I would, he replied simply, settling into the chair across from her. How are you feeling? Better each day, doctor. Wallace says I'm healing well and William is thriving. She marked her place in her book and set it aside. And how was your cabin? All well. Fine, Zach assured her. Nothing a good fire and some sweeping couldn't fix. They fell into easy conversation, discussing the storm, the town's recovery, Mrs. Parker's latest gossip about the blacksmith's daughter running off with a traveling salesman. It felt comfortable, natural, as if they'd known each other far longer than the few weeks it had actually been. As the afternoon light began to fade, Zach finally broached the subject he'd been considering since his visit to the mayor and reverend. Beatrice, he began, uncharacteristically nervous. I've been thinking about what we discussed yesterday. Her expression grew serious. Yes. I meant what I said about taking things slow, about doing this properly. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. But I want to be clear about my intentions so there's no confusion. William stirred in his basket, and Beatrice automatically reached down to rock it gently. The gesture, so natural and maternal, strengthened Zach's resolve. I intend to court you, Beatrice Ellison, with the hope that someday you might consider becoming my wife, not out of gratitude or convenience, but because we've found something together worth building on. He held her gaze steadily. I talked to Mayor Wilson and Reverend Hayes today just to understand how things might work, given your position as the town's teacher and, well, the recency of everything. Beatrice's eyes widened. You spoke to the mayor and the reverend, a blush colored her cheeks, about us. I wanted to be sure there would be no impediments, no reason we couldn't pursue this if when the time is right. He rushed to add, I'm not proposing today. That would be too soon for both of us. I just wanted you to know that I'm serious about this. About you and William. For a long moment, Beatrice was silent, her expression unreadable. Then a smile slowly spread across her face, lighting her eyes. Zachariah Abbott, she said softly, you continue to surprise me in the most wonderful ways. She rose from her chair and crossed to him, moving carefully but with determination. Before he could stand, she leaned down and kissed him, her lips warm and sure against his. When she pulled back, her eyes were bright with emotion. I accept your intention to court me, she said formally, though her smile was anything but. And I look forward to discovering where this path leads us. Zach stood, gently pulling her into his arms. I can tell you where I hope it leads, he murmured against her hair. To a life together. To a family, you, me, William, and maybe someday, more children. To a home filled with laughter and love. Beatrice leaned back to look up at him, tears shimmering in her eyes. That sounds like everything I've ever wanted. In that moment, with the woman he loved in his arms and her son sleeping peacefully beside them, Zach knew with absolute certainty that finding Beatrice coughing in the cold that winter night had been more than chance, it had been destiny. Spring came to Loveland with a rush of green and the sweet scent of prairie flowers. The harsh winter gradually released its grip, allowing new life to emerge from beneath the snow. For Beatrice and William, the changing season marked 3 months in their new home, the small but comfortable teacher's house behind the schoolhouse. Beatrice had taken to teaching with a passion that impressed the town council and endeared her to her students. Despite having a 3-month-old baby, she managed the schoolroom with calm efficiency, often wearing William in a sling across her chest as she taught. The older girls were enchanted with the infant and eagerly helped mind him during recesses. As for Zach, he had become a constant presence in their lives. True to his word, he courted Beatrice, properly bringing flowers, taking her on buggy rides when weather permitted, joining her for Sunday dinners after church. He spent evenings in the teacher's house, helping with chores, reading aloud while she graded papers, and doting on William, who had grown into a sturdy, happy baby with his mother's dark hair and an infectious laugh. The town watched their courtship with approving eyes. The story of how Zach had found Beatrice in the wilderness and helped deliver her son had become something of a local legend, romanticized with each retelling. Few questioned the propriety of their relationship, seeing in it a natural progression of events blessed by Providence. On a particularly fine April day, Zach arrived at the teacher's house with his wagon instead of his usual horse. "What's this?" Beatrice asked, greeting him at the door with William on her hip. "I thought we might take a picnic," Zach suggested. "It's Saturday, the weather's fine, and I know a spot by the creek that should be perfect." Beatrice's face lit up. "That sounds wonderful. Let me get William ready and pack some food." Soon they were traveling along a winding trail that led away from town, the wagon loaded with blankets, a picnic basket, and a contented baby. Beatrice had bloomed with the spring, her figure regaining its curves, her skin glowing with health. She wore a simple blue dress that brought out the color of her eyes, and her hair, longer now, was braided and pinned in a coronet around her head. "You look beautiful today," Zach said, not for the first time. She smiled, still sometimes shy about accepting compliments. "Thank you. It feels good to be outside after such a long winter." The spot Zach had chosen was indeed perfect, a grassy clearing by a small creek, sheltered by cottonwoods just beginning to leaf out. He helped Beatrice down from the wagon and spread blankets on the new grass. They ate the simple meal she had prepared: bread, cheese, cold chicken, and apple tarts, while William slept contentedly on a blanket beside them. The conversation flowed easily between them, touching on the school, Zach's horses, town gossip, and plans for the coming summer. "I was thinking," Zach said as they finished the last of the apple tarts, "about my cabin." "Oh," Beatrice brushed crumbs from her skirt, glancing at him curiously. "It's a good solid place, but it needs some improvements. Another bedroom for one thing, a proper kitchen. Maybe a porch where someone could sit on summer evenings." He met her eyes steadily. "The kind of improvements a family would need." Beatrice's breath caught. "Zach." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box, a luxury he'd ordered specially from Denver. "Beatrice Ellison, these past months have been the happiest of my life. Getting to know you, watching William grow, building something between us that I never thought I'd find." He opened the box, revealing a simple gold band set with a small but perfect diamond. "I'm asking you to marry me. To make a family with me, you, William, and I." Tears filled Beatrice's eyes. "Zach, She took a shaky breath. "Are you certain? William isn't your son, and he is in every way that matters," Zach interrupted firmly. "I love him as my own. I want to raise him as my own. And I want him to grow up calling me Pa." A tear slipped down Beatrice's cheek. "I've dreamed of this," she admitted softly, "of us becoming a real family, but I was afraid to hope too much, afraid it might be too complicated or too soon." "Is that a yes?" Zach asked, his heart in his throat. Beatrice laughed through her tears. Yes, of course it's a yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into his arms, kissing her with all the love and promise he felt. William chose that moment to wake, announcing his presence with a hungry cry. Beatrice drew back from the kiss with a laugh. "And there's our son, making sure we don't forget him." "Never," Zach promised, reaching for the baby and lifting him high, earning a delighted gurgle. "You're stuck with us now, little man, for good." They were married in June, when the prairie was ablaze with wildflowers. The whole town turned out for the ceremony in Loveland's small church, followed by a celebration that spilled into the street outside. Beatrice wore a new dress of cream-colored silk, with William, now 6 months old and sitting up on his own, dressed in a tiny suit that matched Zach's. During the ceremony, when Reverend Hayes asked who gave this woman in marriage, Mayor Wilson stepped forward. "The town of Loveland does," he announced proudly, and a murmur of approval swept through the congregation. After the vows were exchanged and the register signed, Zach surprised Beatrice by producing a second document, adoption papers for William, legally changing his name to William Abbott. As she read the document, understanding dawning in her eyes, he knelt beside her chair. "I want him to be mine in name as well as heart," he explained. "If you agree." Beatrice's answer was to place the baby in his arms. "He already is yours," she said simply. "This just makes it official." Their first year as a family brought both joys and challenges. Zach's cabin underwent the promised renovations, expanding to accommodate not only the three of them, but also Beatrice's books, piano, and the growing collection of toys that seemed to multiply as William learned to crawl, then toddle, then run. Beatrice continued teaching, bringing William with her until he grew too active to manage in the classroom. Then, Zach adjusted his schedule, caring for the boy in the mornings while working with the horses in the afternoons when Beatrice returned home. It wasn't a conventional arrangement, but it worked for them. In the evenings, they established rituals that became the framework of their family life, reading aloud by the fire. Music at the piano Zach had surprised her with on their first Christmas, long conversations after William was asleep. They learned each other's habits, preferences, fears, and dreams. They argued sometimes. Beatrice was stubborn. Zach could be taciturn, but always found their way back to each other. As William's first birthday approached, Beatrice began to feel unwell in the mornings. When Dr. Wallace confirmed her suspicions, she waited until after dinner one night to share the news with Zach. "Do you remember the night we met?" she asked as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. Zach smiled, taking her hand. "How could I forget? You were coughing in the cold, and I told you that I'd warm by your fire that night," she finished, squeezing his fingers. "It changed everything for me, for us. Best decision I ever made bringing you home," he agreed. Beatrice turned to face him fully. "Our family is going to grow, Zach. By next winter, William will have a little brother or sister." For a moment, Zach stared at her in stunned silence. Then a grin spread across his face, wide and joyful. "Really? You're certain?" Dr. Wallace confirmed it yesterday. She laughed as he gathered her into a fierce hug. "A baby," he whispered against her hair. "Our baby. Are you happy?" she asked, though his reaction left little doubt. "Happier than I ever thought possible," he assured her. "I love you, Beatrice Abbott, you and William and this new little one." His hand moved to rest on her still flat stomach. "Our family." When their daughter, Emma Rose Abbott, was born the following winter safely and smoothly, with Dr. Wallace declaring it a textbook delivery, Zach held her with the same wonder he'd felt holding William, but with the added confidence of a man who knew his place in the world and in the hearts of those he loved. As he watched Beatrice nursing their daughter, with 2-year-old William curled beside them examining his new sister's tiny fingers, Zach reflected on the strange and wonderful journey that had brought them to this moment. A chance encounter in a snowstorm, an act of kindness, a leap of faith, and now a family bound by love rather than blood, stronger for the trials they had overcome together. "What are you thinking about?" Beatrice asked, noticing his contemplative expression. "How lucky I am," he replied honestly. How one decision, stopping to investigate a cough in the cold, changed everything. Beatrice smiled, the same smile that had captivated him from the beginning. "I believe it was more than luck, Zachariah Abbott. I believe it was meant to be." As Emma's tiny fingers wrapped around his, Zach couldn't help but agree. Some things, it seemed, were written in the stars long before they came to pass. And this family, this love was surely one of them. Years passed, and Loveland grew from a small frontier settlement into a proper town with a bank, a newspaper, and even a small hotel. Beatrice continued teaching until the school board promoted her to headmistress, overseeing 3 teachers in the expanded schoolhouse. Zach's horse breeding business thrived, his animals becoming known throughout the territory for their quality and temperament. William, now 10, showed a talent for working with horses that made Zach burst with pride, though not by blood related. Emma, at 8, had her mother's love of books and her father's quiet determination. And their youngest, James Thomas Abbott, born 6 years after their marriage, was a curious 5-year-old who constantly asked why and delighted in taking things apart to see how they worked. On cold winter evenings, when the family gathered around the fire in the now spacious cabin, Beatrice would sometimes tell the children the story of how she and their father had met a tale that never lost its magic, no matter how many times it was told. "And then," she would say, her eyes meeting Zach's across the room, "your father found me coughing in the cold, and do you know what he said?" The children would chorus the familiar line, "You'll warm by my fire tonight." And Zach would smile, knowing that in that moment of decision to stop, to help, to care, he had found not just a woman in need, but his own salvation, his future, his heart's home. In saving Beatrice, he had saved himself from a life of solitude he hadn't even realized he was trapped in. As for Beatrice, she had found in Zach's steady love the security she had never known, not in her father's business arrangements or in her first husband's cruelty. She had found a partner who valued her mind as well as her heart, who encouraged her independence even as he protected her fiercely, who loved her children with the same unwavering devotion he showed to her. Together, they had built something rare and precious on that foundation of chance and compassion, a family bound by choice rather than obligation, a love that had weathered storms both literal and figurative, a home where laughter was abundant and forgiveness was given freely. And on those nights when the Wyoming wind howled around their sturdy cabin, much as it had on that fateful evening years before, Beatrice would look at her husband across their sleeping children and whisper, "I'm still warming by your fire, Zachariah Abbott." And he would always reply, "And you always will be, as long as there's breath in my body and love in my heart." It was a promise kept through all the seasons of their lives together, a promise that had begun with an act of kindness on a cold winter's night, when a cowboy found a pregnant woman coughing in the cold and decided to change both their destinies with a simple offer of warmth and shelter. In the end, that was the legacy they built together, not just in their children or their contributions to Loveland, but in the example they set of how love, when given freely and accepted bravely, could transform lives and create something beautiful from the most unlikely beginnings.